Orion Hext wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a silent ornament to match the cold marble of his estate. Vesper had spent every day of her marriage learning that in this world of opulence, her humble origins were a sin she could only atone for by being invisible and perfect. Tonight, as she adjusted her posture under the critical gaze of 300 people worth more than her entire life, she felt her nerves stretched like violin strings about to snap. She believed she was there only to smile and nod. She didn't know that the cold sweat on her palms was about to cause an accident that wouldn't just stain the carpet, but would summon a vampire king who had spent centuries looking for someone who bled reality in a room full of lies. "I'm so sorry." Orion's hand clamped around her wrist. His fingers dug into the bone hard enough to bruise, and when she looked up, his smile was still in place. That terrible, perfect smile he wore for everyone else. "Clumsy tonight," he said, his voice light, conversational. The grip tightened. "Aren't you?" The ballroom of the Hex estate stretched around them like a cathedral built to worship money. Chandeliers dripped light onto imported marble. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies, flowers that would be thrown away tomorrow, replaced with new ones. Vesper had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment where her mother stretched hamburger meat with oatmeal. She'd thought marrying Orion would mean safety. She'd been wrong about so many things. "I'll get something to clean it up," she whispered, trying to pull away. His mother, Celine, glided over in silver Valentino, her expression carved from ice. "The staff will handle it." "Oh, Vesper, darling, why don't you powder your nose? You look flushed." Translation: "You're embarrassing us. Disappear." Vesper nodded, throat tight, and fled toward the bathroom. Behind her, Orion's laugh rang out, easy and charming, already telling some story to smooth over her failure. Her heels clicked against the floor like a countdown. The bathroom was all black marble and gold fixtures, designed to make you feel small. Vesper gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection. Foundation couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes. The dress Orion had chosen, champagne silk, that cost more than her college tuition, hung on her frame like a costume. Her phone buzzed. A text from Orion. Asterisk. "Where are you? Nother. Asterisk. Where asking about you? Nother. Nother. Whed. Whed. Nother. 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 Make me look bad. Asterisk." Her hands shook as she typed back. Asterisk. "Coming now." She'd forgotten something. The dry cleaning. He'd asked her to pick up his custom suits before the party, and she'd forgotten because she'd been trying to find the right caterer, the one his mother had recommended, the one who didn't return calls unless you dropped the Hex name. She'd meant to go after, but time had slipped away, and now, the bathroom door swung open. Orion stepped inside and locked it behind him. "Do you have any idea," he said quietly, "how that looked? It was an accident. You dropped a glass in front of the Vandermeers, Thomas Vandermeer, who I've been courting for 6 months for the merger." His voice was soft, controlled, more dangerous than shouting. "And where are my suits?" Her stomach dropped. "I forgot. I'm sorry. I was trying to." "You forgot." He stepped closer. She could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive that used to make her feel safe. "I asked you to do one thing, one simple thing. I'll get them first thing tomorrow. They're for the morning meeting, Vesper. The meeting that determines whether I make partner." His jaw tightened. "Do you understand what you've done? I'll fix it." "You can't fix it." His hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You can't do anything right, can you? I pulled you out of that pathetic little life, gave you everything, and you can't even." "Please, Orion, I'm sorry." The slap came so fast, she didn't see it. Her head snapped to the side, cheek exploding with heat. The sound echoed off marble walls, impossibly loud, and for a moment the world went white at the edges. "Get yourself together," he said, straightening his cuffs, "and stay out of sight for the rest of the night. I'll make excuses." He left. The lock clicked open, then shut, and Vesper stood there with her hand pressed to her burning face, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. She didn't go back to the party. Instead, she walked out the side door, across the manicured lawn, past the gardens where imported roses bloomed in perfect rows. The night air bit through her thin dress, but she welcomed the cold. It made her feel real again. Rain started as she reached the edge of the property, fat drops that soaked through silk in seconds. She should go back. She should apologize again. Try harder. Be better. That's what she always did. Orion would be angry, but eventually he'd forgive her, and things would go back to normal. That careful walking on glass normal, where she measured every word and tried to anticipate his moods and failed. Always failed. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out with numb fingers. "You're embarrassing me. Get back here. Now." Another text. Asterisk. "I swear to God, Vesper." Another. Asterisk. "Fine. Stay out there. See if I care." She turned the phone off and kept walking. The Hext estate, backed onto old forest, the kind developers hadn't touched yet. Trees pressed close to the iron fence, branches reaching over like grasping hands. Vesper found the gap she'd discovered weeks ago, a place where the fence had buckled, where you could slip through if you didn't mind tearing your dress. She didn't mind anymore. The forest swallowed her, and rain poured harder, turning the ground to mud, and she stumbled between trees with no destination in mind. Her shoes sank into earth, her hair plastered to her skull. She was crying, she realized, though she couldn't remember when that had started. How had she gotten here? She'd been smart once, top of her class, full scholarship. She'd had plans, graduate school, a career, independence. Then Orion had smiled at her across a coffee shop, and she'd thought, asterisk, finally, someone who sees me. He'd seen something, all right, something to mold, something to control. She didn't know how long she walked before she saw the light. It came from deeper in the forest, a warm glow that didn't belong. Vesper moved toward it without thinking, drawn by something she couldn't name. The trees opened into a clearing, and there a man stood in the rain, completely dry. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, tall, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and skin so pale it seemed to glow. He wore a black suit that belonged in a different century, all sharp lines and silver buttons. When he turned toward her, his eyes were the color of old blood. "You're crying," he said. His voice was silk over steel, accented with something ancient. "How tedious for you." Vesper should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Instead, she stood there, shivering, and said, "Who are you?" "Thorne Valerius." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle. "And you are Vesper Krell, the girl who married the wrong man. How do you know my name?" "I know many things." He stepped closer, and she realized the rain parted around him, as if the sky itself was afraid to touch him. "I know your husband struck you. I know you've forgotten what it feels like to breathe without permission. I know you're standing in my forest, bleeding despair into the earth." Her hand went to her cheek, still burning. "I should go." "Should you?" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "Back to that gilded cage. Back to a man who sees you as property. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He moved faster than possible, suddenly close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest. No breath, no heartbeat. "I understand that you want him to suffer, that you fantasize about watching his empire crumble, that you dream of the day he realizes you were never the weak thing he imagined." The truth of it hit her like a fist. "What are you?" "Salvation." Thorne knelt in the mud, rain streaming around him. and pulled a black ring from his pocket. Obsidian, carved with symbols that seemed to move in the light. Be my wife, Vesper Krell, be my queen, and I will give you the power to destroy him. The ring sat in his palm like a promise, written in shadow. Vesper's breath came shallow, her pulse hammering against the base of her throat. The rain had stopped touching her too, as if she'd already crossed some invisible threshold into his world. You're insane, she whispered, but her eyes stayed fixed on the obsidian band. Pragmatic. Thorne rose in one fluid motion, mud sliding off his coat like water off glass. Your husband owns your name, your home, your reputation, but he doesn't own your soul. Not yet. He held the ring between them, and in the shifting moonlight, the carved symbols seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. This is a contract. You become mine in title, and I give you the tools to reclaim everything he stole. Tools. The word tasted bitter. You mean money? I mean power. His voice dropped lower, intimate as a blade against skin. The kind that makes men like Orion hexed. Remember they're only mortal. Vesper's hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingers hovered an inch from the ring, and she could feel cold radiating from it, seeping into her bones. What's the price? Honesty. Thorne's smile sharpened. You stop pretending you want to forgive him. Stop performing the role of dutiful wife. Become what you were always meant to be, which is dangerous. The word settled over her like a second skin. Vesper thought of Orion's hand across her face, the casual cruelty in his eyes when he'd called her pathetic. She thought of Selene's poisoned smile, the years of small humiliations designed to break her down into something manageable. The ring gleamed in Thorne's palm, and for the first time in 3 years, Vesper felt something sharper than despair. She felt hungry. Her fingers closed around the obsidian. The metal burned cold, then warm, then settled into her skin, like it had always belonged there. The symbols flared once, bright as moonlight, then faded to a dull sheen. Good girl, Thorne murmured, and the approval in his voice sent heat crawling up her spine. Now, let's get you out of that dress. The Platinum Court existed in the spaces between things, not quite in the city, not quite out of it, a sprawling estate that seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, like her eyes couldn't quite hold its edges. Thorne's car was a black Mercedes that smelled of leather and something darker, something that made her think of old churches and older sins. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, and didn't speak. Vesper pressed her forehead against the cool window and watched the city lights blur into watercolor streaks. The ring sat heavy on her finger, warmer now, almost alive. What happens when Orion finds out? She asked finally. He won't. Not until we want him to. Thorne's voice was silk over steel. You'll file for divorce tomorrow. Irreconcilable differences. My lawyers will handle everything. He'll fight it. Let him. The car turned down a private road lined with iron gates and ancient oaks. By the time he realizes what's happening, you'll be untouchable. The estate rose from the darkness, like something out of a fever dream. White stone that seemed to glow from within. Tall windows that reflected nothing. Gardens that looked silver in the moonlight. Vesper's breath caught. She'd grown up in modest comfort, married into Orion's new money ostentation. But this was something else entirely. Old power. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Thorne pulled up to the front entrance, where a figure waited in the shadows, tall, dark-skinned, with eyes that caught the light, like a cat's. Offers. He opened Vesper's door before she could reach for the handle. Darius. Thorne said, take her to the east wing. Have Livia prepare the wardrobe. Darius inclined his head, then offered Vesper his hand. His palm was cool, his grip gentle but immovable. This way, Mrs. Krell. Vesper, she corrected automatically. His smile showed too many teeth. Not for much longer. The interior of the estate was a study in contrasts. Modern minimalism, wrapped around Baroque bones, marble floors that whispered under her feet, walls hung with art that looked simultaneously contemporary and ancient. Vesper caught glimpses of other figures moving through distant doorways, pale and graceful, their movements too smooth to be entirely human. "How many of you are there?" she asked, as Darius led her up a sweeping staircase. "In the court, 43, currently." He glanced back at her, assessing. "Don't worry, you'll be under Thorne's protection. No one will touch you without permission." The phrasing made her skin prickle. And with permission, that would be your choice. They reached a landing, turned down a hallway, lit by sconces that burned without flame. "We're not monsters, Vesper. We're just older than your morality." He stopped at a door carved with the same symbols as her ring. Inside, the room was larger than her entire apartment with Orion. A four-poster bed draped in silver silk, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch into infinity, a fireplace where flames danced without heat, and standing by a wardrobe that could have held 100 dresses, Holben, who looked barely 20, with platinum hair and eyes like chips of amber. "Livia," Darius said, "our newest project." Livia circled Vesper slowly, her gaze clinical. Thorne wasn't exaggerating. "You're a disaster," but her tone held no cruelty, only professional assessment. "When did you last eat something that wasn't an obligation?" Vesper's throat tightened. "I don't." Rhetorical question. Livia waved a hand. "Strip. I need to see what we're working with." Heat flooded Vesper's face. "I'm not. You're exhausted, malnourished, and carrying 3 years of tension in your shoulders." Livia's voice softened slightly. "I'm not here to judge you, darling. I'm here to rebuild you. Now strip, or I'll have Darius do it, and he's far less gentle than I am." Darius had already disappeared. Vesper stood alone with this strange woman in this impossible room, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. Her fingers shook as she unzipped the ruined cocktail dress, let it pool at her feet. Her bra was plain cotton. Her underwear had a small hole near the elastic that she'd been meaning to replace for months. Livia's expression didn't change. She simply nodded and opened the wardrobe. "First rule of power," she said, pulling out a silk robe the color of midnight. "Your body is a weapon. We're going to sharpen it." The next week blurred into a fever dream of transformation. Vesper slept in silk sheets and woke to breakfast prepared by staff who moved like shadows. Livia appeared each morning with new clothes, not the demure pastels Celine had insisted on, but rich jewel tones that made Vesper's pale skin luminous: emerald, sapphire, deep crimson that looked like spilled wine. "Color is confidence," Livia explained, pinning Vesper's dark hair into an elegant twist. "Orion dressed you like a doll. We're dressing you like a queen." There were other lessons. A woman named Mira taught her to walk differently, not the mincing steps of a society wife, but a predator's glide, weight-centered, spine straight. "You're not apologizing for taking up space anymore," Mira said, circling her with approval. "You're claiming it." A man called Silas, ancient and patient, taught her the politics of the court, who held power, who wanted it, the delicate balance of favors and debts that kept their world turning. "Information is currency," he said, his voice like rustling paper, "and you're about to become very wealthy." But it was the evenings with Thorne that unmade her. He appeared each night as the sun set, always impeccably dressed, always watching her with that unsettling intensity. They'd sit in his study, all dark wood and leather-bound books, and he'd ask her questions, not about Orion, about her. "What did you want to be?" he asked on the third night, pouring her wine that tasted like crushed berries and smoke. Before him, Vesper turned the glass in her hands, watching the liquid catch the firelight. "Photographer. I wanted to capture moments that people usually missed. the way light falls through leaves, the expression on someone's face when they think no one's looking. Why did you stop? Orion said it was a hobby, not a career. The words came easier now, without the usual shame. He said I should focus on supporting him. Thorne leaned back in his chair, and something dangerous flickered across his face. And you believed him? I was 21, and in love. She met his eyes. Or what I thought was love. Love, Thorne repeated, tasting the word. That peculiar human addiction to your own suffering. You've never been in love? His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I've been many things over 5 centuries. Vesper, in love, is not one of them. He stood, moved to the window overlooking the gardens. But I understand obsession. The need to possess something so completely that it becomes part of your bones. The air between them thickened. Vesper's pulse quickened, and she knew he could hear it. The rabbit-fast flutter of her mortal heart. Is that what I am? She asked quietly. Your obsession? Thorne turned, and the moonlight behind him made him look carved from marble. You're my investment. Whether you become more depends entirely on how well you learn to bite back. On the 8th night, he took her to the Platinum Court's heart. The ballroom existed in impossible space, too large for the estate's exterior, ceiling lost in shadow, floor polished to mirror brightness. Vampires moved through it like living art, their beauty so sharp it hurt to look at directly. They wore their immortality like expensive cologne, casual and devastating. Vesper's dress was black silk that moved like water, cut to show the curve of her collarbones, the length of her throat. Livia had painted her lips dark red and lined her eyes with kohl that made them look huge and dangerous. Breathe, Thorne murmured beside her, his hand resting at the small of her back. The touch burned through the thin fabric. They can smell fear, comforting. His laugh was low and genuine. You're doing better than you think. They moved through the crowd, and Vesper felt eyes tracking her, curious, assessing, hungry. Thorne introduced her to dozens of faces that blurred together, names she'd never remember, but she caught the pattern, the way they looked at her ring first, then at Thorne, then back at her with new respect. She was marked, protected. His. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like armor. Dance with me, Thorne said. When they reached the floor's center, the music was something classical and mournful, strings that sounded like weeping. Vesper let him pull her close, one hand at her waist, the other capturing her fingers. He moved with inhuman grace, and she followed, her body remembering lessons from another life, when she'd taken ballroom classes and dreamed of elegant parties. You're thinking too much, Thorne said against her ear. I'm thinking that this is insane. But she didn't pull away. A week ago, I was married to Orion. Now I'm dancing with a vampire king in a ballroom that shouldn't exist, and which feels more real. The question landed like a blow, because this, his hand on her waist, the music thrumming through her bones, the weight of the court's attention, felt more solid than anything in her marriage ever had. Orion's world had been performance, surfaces, everything designed to impress. This was raw and dangerous and true. I filed the divorce papers yesterday, she said. I know. Thorne spun her, and when she came back, he was smiling. He's already called 6 times. My lawyers are enjoying themselves immensely. He'll come for me. Let him. Thorne's eyes glittered. I'm counting on it. The invitation arrived on the 14th day, delivered by a courier who looked nervous entering the estate's grounds. Heavy cardstock, embossed with Orion's corporate logo. Vesper opened it in her room. Livia, watching from the doorway, *Orion hexed, requests the pleasure of your company at the annual charity gala, black tie, +1 welcome. The date was 2 weeks away. Ephersa stared at the elegant script, her hands steady for the first time in years. He's trying to humiliate you, Livia said. Public venue, all your old friends. He wants you to show up broken, so he can play the magnanimous husband. Yes. Vesper set the invitation on her vanity, next to the jewelry Thorne had given her, diamonds that looked like frozen tears, a necklace of black pearls that felt warm against her skin. That's exactly what he wants, so you're not going. Vesper turned to the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, elegant, dangerous, eyes that held secrets and promises of violence. Her hair fell in dark waves over bare shoulders. Her lips were the color of arterial blood. She looked like she could destroy empires and not lose sleep. She looked like a queen. "Oh, I'm going," Vesper said, and her smile was cold enough to freeze. "I'm going to show him exactly what he lost." Behind her reflection, she caught Livia's approving grin, and in the mirror's depths, the obsidian ring pulsed once with dark light. The gala was held at the Meridian, the same hotel where Orion had proposed 5 years ago. Vesper remembered that night, her nervous laughter, the champagne that tasted like promises, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. She remembered it, the way you remember a stranger's face. The car Thorne sent was a vintage Rolls-Royce, black as a raven's wing. Vesper sat in the back, watching the city lights blur past, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She wore midnight blue silk that moved like water, the neckline, a deep V that showcased the black pearl necklace. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate twist, in an ear, a few strategic tendrils framing her face. Livia had done her makeup, smoky eyes, blood-red lips, skin that seemed to glow from within. The obsidian ring felt warm on her finger. Thorne sat beside her, devastating in a black tuxedo that looked hand-stitched by angels with a vendetta. His hair was pulled back, showcasing the sharp architecture of his face. He hadn't touched her since they'd entered the car, but she felt his presence like electricity, crackling in the space between their bodies. "Nervous?" he asked. No, and it was true. The trembling girl who'd fled this building 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place sat someone who'd learned that power wasn't something you begged for. It was something you took with both hands and refused to release. The car stopped. A valet opened her door, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her. Vesper stepped onto the red carpet, and the night air kissed her bare shoulders like a lover's promise. Thorne appeared at her side, offering his arm. She took it, feeling the coiled strength beneath the expensive fabric. They moved toward the entrance, and she caught the whispers starting, a ripple of recognition, confusion, shock. Asterisk. Is that Vesper Krell? Asterisk. It can't be. She looks. Asterisk. Who is that man? The lobby was exactly as she remembered. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Orion's charity gala was the event of the season, a place where the city's elite came to be seen, donating money they'd never miss. She'd attended 4 of these as Orion's wife, always in conservative dresses. Celine had approved, always smiling until her face ached, always invisible. Not tonight. They entered the ballroom, and the effect was immediate. Conversations stuttered. Palsy, heads turned. Vesper felt the weight of 100 stares, felt the shock rippling through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. And there, across the room, standing with a champagne flute, and a woman who looked like she'd been poured into her dress. Orion, he saw her. His face went through a fascinating progression of emotions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something that might have been fear. Vesper smiled. They moved through the crowd like sharks, through a school of fish. People parted, without realizing they were doing it, responding to something primal in Thorne's presence. He guided her with a hand on the small of her back, his touch burning through the silk. Vesper, Orion's voice cut through the music. He was moving toward them, his date forgotten, his face carefully arranged into something that might have passed for concern if you didn't know him. I didn't think you'd come, didn't you? She kept her voice light, conversational. You sent the invitation. Yes. But his eyes flicked to Thorne, and she saw him trying to categorize, to understand. I thought you might want to talk, privately, about the divorce. The divorce. Vesper tasted the words. How interesting. I don't recall agreeing to one. Orion's jaw tightened. Vesper, don't be difficult. We both know the marriage is over. I'm willing to be generous. The house, a reasonable settlement. Generous. Thorne's voice was soft, but it cut through Orion's words, like a blade through silk. How very magnanimous of you. Orion's eyes narrowed. And you are Thorne Valerius. He didn't offer his hand. Vesper's husband. The words landed like a bomb in still water. Orion's face went white, then red. That's not possible. We're still married. She can't. Actually, Vesper said, pulling a folded document from her clutch. I can. You see, you had me sign so many papers over the years. Orion. Remember, all those documents you said were just formalities. Household things. Nothing to worry my pretty little head about. She unfolded the paper slowly, savoring his growing panic. Turns out one of them was a separation agreement. You forged my signature on the divorce papers 6 months ago, had them filed quietly, probably planning to surprise me with your new fiancé at just the right moment. She let that sink in. The marriage was legally dissolved before I ever left, which means, when I married Thorne 2 weeks ago, it was perfectly legitimate. Orion lunged for the paper. Thorne moved, not fast, not obviously, just a subtle shift that put his body between them. Orion froze, his hand suspended in midair, every instinct suddenly screaming at him to back away. Don't, Thorne said quietly. Orion, the ballroom, had gone silent. Everyone was watching now, the city's elite, witnessing Orion Heck's Kef's orchestrally constructed world beginning to crack. You can't do this. Orion hissed. Everything you have, I gave you. The clothes, the jewelry, the life, the bruises. Vesper's voice was ice. Or did you give me those too? The dislocated shoulder, the fractured ribs you told the doctor came from a fall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She saw Celine pushing through the masses, her face a mask of fury. You ungrateful little, Celine started. Mrs. Hext. A new voice, smooth and professional. Darius appeared from the crowd, carrying a leather portfolio. I believe you'll want to see this. He opened the portfolio, revealing documents with official seals. Your son took out several loans over the past 3 years, used his company as collateral. The lenders sold the debt 6 months ago. He smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. My employer purchased it. All of it. Orion's face went grey. That's not. Those were private transactions. Nothing's private, if you know where to look, Thorne said. And I've had 500 years to learn. Vesper watched understanding dawn in Orion's eyes, the impossible truth of what stood before him. Orion's voice cracked. That's insane. Vampires aren't real. Horn, smile showed too many teeth. How disappointing. I was so hoping you'd believe. Darius laid out more papers on a nearby table. The debt is substantial, payable immediately, per the terms of the original agreement, unless, of course, you'd prefer to negotiate. What do you want? Orion's voice was barely a whisper. Vesper stepped forward, pulling a pen from her clutch. Everything. The company, the house, the cars, the art, collection, all of it transferred to a trust in my name. She laid the final document on the table. Sign it, and the debt is forgiven. Refuse, and by Monday morning, you'll have nothing but bankruptcy and a fraud investigation. You can't. I can. She met his eyes, and she saw him finally see her. Not the broken girl he'd married, not the convenient punching bag, but the woman who'd learned to bite back. You taught me that the world belongs to people who take what they want. Consider this, my graduation. Orion looked around the ballroom, at the watching faces, the phones recording, the empire he'd built crumbling in real time. His hand shook as he reached for the pen. If you sign that, Celine snarled. You're admitting. Be quiet, mother. Orion's voice was dead. He signed his name in sharp, angry strokes. Once, twice, 3 times. Vesper took the documents, handed them to Darius. Pleasure doing business with you. She turned to leave, Thorne's hand finding the small of her back again. They made it 3 steps before Orion's voice rang out. You think you've won? You think this makes you better than me? Vesper stopped, turned, looked at the man who'd spent 5 years trying to break her. No, she said softly. It makes me free. They left him standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of his reputation, and walked out into the night. The car was waiting. Vesper slid into the back seat, and only then did the trembling start. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what she'd just done. Thorne got in beside her, and without a word pulled her against his chest. She went, pressing her face into his shoulder, breathing in cedar and smoke, and the strange cold scent that was uniquely him. Is it really over? She whispered. The revenge. Yes. His fingers traced patterns on her spine. Everything else. We're just beginning. She pulled back to look at him, this impossible creature who'd given her back her power. What happens now? Now. His smile was slow, dangerous, full of promise. Now you learn what it means to be a queen. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she tasted eternity on his lips. All the years stretching ahead, all the nights she'd walk beside him, all the power she'd wield with hands that would never tremble again. When they finally broke apart, the car was moving through the city, carrying them toward the estate, toward the life she'd chosen. Vesper looked down at the obsidian ring on her finger. In the passing streetlights, it seemed to pulse with its own dark heartbeat, a promise sealed in shadow and blood. She was no longer the girl who'd begged for love from a man who only knew how to destroy. She was Vesper Valerius, and she had learned to destroy right back.